Let's see the play The Way of the World, written in 1700 by William Congreve. In 1700, when The Way of the World was first performed on the English stage at Lincoln's Inn Fields Theatre that William Congreve managed, it was not a popular success. This was the last play William Congreve was to write, perhaps for that reason. Since that time, however, this play has come to be regarded not only as Congreve's masterpiece, but as a classic example of the comedy of manners. Before the action of the play begins, the following events are assumed to have taken place. Mirabell, a young man about town, apparently not a man of great wealth, has had an affair with Mrs. Fainall, the widowed daughter of Lady Wishford. To protect her from scandal in the event of pregnancy, he has helped ensure her marriage to Mr. Fainall, a man whom he feels to be of sufficiently good reputation to constitute a respectable match, but not a man of such virtue that tricking him would be unfair. Fainall, for his part, married the young widow because he coveted her fortune to support his amour with Mrs. Marwood. In time, the relation between Mirabell and Mrs. Fainall ended, and Mirabell found himself in love with Millamant, the niece and ward of Lady Wishford and the cousin of his former mistress. There are, however, financial complications. Half of Millamant's fortune was under her own control, but the other half, £16,000, was controlled by Lady Wishford, to be turned over to Millamant if she married a suitor proved by her aunt. Unfortunately, Mirabell had earlier offended Lady Wishford. She has misinterpreted his flattery as love. Mirabell, therefore, has contrived an elaborate scheme. He has arranged for a pretended uncle to woo and win Lady Wishford. Then Mirabell intends to reveal the actual status of the successful wooer and obtain her consent to his marriage Millamant by rescuing her from this misalliance. Waitwell was to marry Foible, Lady Wishford's maid, before the masquerade, so that he might not desire to hold Lady Wishford to her contract. Mirabell is too much a man of his time to trust anyone in matters of money or love. Millamant is aware of the plot, probably through Foible. When the play opens, Mirabell is impatiently waiting to hear that Waitwell is married to Foible. During Mirabell's card game with Fainall, it becomes clear that the relations between the two men are strained. There are hints at the fact that Fainall has been twice duped by Mirabell. Mrs. Fainall is Mirabell's former mistress, and Mrs. Marwood, Fainall's mistress, is in love with Mirabell. In the meantime, although Millamant quite clearly intends to have Mirabell, she enjoys teasing him in his state of uncertainty. Mirabell bids fair to succeed until, unfortunately, Mrs. Marwood overhears Mrs. Fainall and Foible discussing the scheme, as well as Mirabell and Mrs. Fainall's earlier love affair. Since Mrs. Marwood also overhears insulting comments about herself, she is vengeful and informs Fainall of the plot and the fact, which he suspected before, that his wife was once Mirabell's mistress. The two conspirators now have both motive and means for revenge. In the same afternoon, Millamant accepts Mirabell's proposal and rejects Sir Wilful Witwoud, Lady Wishford's candidate for her hand. Fainall now dominates the action. He unmasks Sir Roland, the false uncle, and blackmails Lady Wishford with the threat of her daughter's disgrace. He demands that balance of Millamon's fortune, now forfeit, be turned over to his sole control, as well as unspent balance of Mrs. Fainall's fortune. In addition, he wants assurance that Lady Wishford will not marry, so that Mrs. Fainall is certain to be the heir. This move of Fainall's is now countered. Millamon says that she will marry Sir Wilful to save her own fortune. Fainall insists that he wants control of the rest of his wife's money and immediate management of Lady Wishford's fortune. When Mirabell brings two servants to prove that Fainall and Mrs. Marwood were themselves guilty of adultery, Fainall ignores the accusation and points out that he will still create a scandal which would blacken the name of Mrs. Fainall unless he gets the money. At this point, Mirabell triumphantly reveals his most successful ploy. Before Mrs. Fainall married Fainall, she and Mirabell had suspected the man's character, and she had appointed her lover trustee of her fortune. Fainall is left with no claim to make because Mrs. Fainall does not control her own money. He and Mrs. Marwood live in great anger. Sir Wilful steps aside as Millamon's suitor. Lady Wishford forgives the servants and consents to the match of Mirabell and Millamant.